$500 million, the lawyer says, and slides a single sheet of paper across the table. Then he says the second number, $26 million sitting in the operating account as of Friday. You are 34. You have $2,900 in savings, a car payment with 14 months left on it, and a job pricing freight lanes for a mid-sized carrier in Columbus for $71,000 a year. And not $1 of that $26 million is yours to spend. The number that isn't a number. Bernard Tice is the lawyer, 72, and he has said the words controlling interest 4 times in 6 minutes without once explaining what you're controlling. Your uncle Emmett Roark died in March. Aneurysm, at 71, in the parking lot of a diner he'd eaten at every Tuesday for 30 years. You had 2 conversations with him in your entire adult life, both about a truck. The woman at the far end of the table doesn't have a laptop. Danae Okafor has been the chief financial officer of Roark Holdings for 19 years. She has 1 sheet of graph paper and a mechanical pencil, and she has never in her career made a slide. When Tice finishes, she turns the paper around and draws a box at the top with your name in it. Then 4 boxes underneath. You do not own 4 businesses, she says. You own the company that owns the 4 businesses. That's the entire definition of a holding company. It doesn't make anything. It doesn't sell anything. It owns things and it decides where money goes. The 4 boxes get names. Tri-State Fire and Safety, which inspects sprinkler systems. Corrigan Stamping, which presses sheet metal into parts for cars and washing machines. Ladderback Foods, which drives frozen product to restaurants across 4 states. Merit Casualty, a small commercial insurance carrier you could not explain to your mother. You have never worked a day inside any of them. Then Danae writes the first real number of your life. $500 million is what the whole thing is worth, she says, and that is not what you're getting. That 500 is enterprise value. It's the price of the machine, debt, and everything, what a buyer would pay for the businesses before anybody asks who else has a claim on them. And people do have claims. There is $185 million of debt sitting against these companies. 500 minus 185 is 315. Then she adds back cash, and here she corrects the thing Tice said. Yes, there's $26 million in the accounts. About $6 million of it isn't yours in any practical sense. It's operating cash, the float that covers payroll on the 14th, and the fuel cards and the claims that clear on a Thursday. Take that out, and you have $20 million of genuinely excess cash. 315 plus 20. $335 million of equity value. That's the number that belongs to owners, she says. Not to you. To owners. Because you don't own all of it. You own 62%. Your cousin Ren Roark owns 18%. A trust for Emmett's sister holds 12%, and the 4 people who actually run the operating companies hold the last 8 between them, which was deliberate, which you will understand later. 62% of $335 million is $208 million. $208 million. And there's no account you can log into and see it, no ticker, no button. You cannot buy a sandwich with any of it. It's a number that exists because a valuation firm in Chicago spent 6 weeks last summer deciding it existed. So what do I actually get, you ask? Danae turns the paper over. $62 million, she writes. That's consolidated EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a useful number and it is not a real one. It's what the businesses earn before the 4 things that always show up and take their share. $11 million of maintenance capital expenditure. Not growth. Trucks that die, presses that wear out, compressors, roofs. The money you spend every year just to be the same size next year. $15.5 million of cash interest. That $185 million of debt costs a blended 8.4%, and it comes out in cash every quarter, whether or not it was a good year. $7 million of cash taxes, $4 million of holding company overhead, 11 people, this office above a bank, the audit, the directors and officers' insurance, Danae's salary and yours. 62 minus 11 minus 15.5 minus 7 minus 4. She doesn't use a calculator. $24.5 million of free cash flow. That's the first honest number on the page, and $10 million of it is already promised. Mandatory amortization, the principal the lenders require you to repay every year on schedule, not when it's convenient. Which leaves $14.5 million. Call it 14. $14 million. Out of 500. That's the money actually loose in a business worth $500 million. The only money in this structure that answers to a decision instead of a contract. Danae caps the pencil and looks at you for the first time all morning. So, she says, what do you want to do with it? And you don't answer. Not because you're being careful, because you have absolutely no idea what any of these four things actually are. Why the boring one is worth 4 times the exciting one. You start with Tri-State because Danae says start with Tri-State. 6 in the morning, a low building off a state route outside Akron, and the first thing you see is the dispatch board, a magnetic whiteboard nobody has digitized because Ray Puentes doesn't trust software he can't see from across the room. Ray runs Tri-State. He started there at 22 pulling pipe, and he still wears the company polo. There are 71 route names on that board, and every one is a building legally required to have its sprinkler system inspected once a year by somebody with a license. Not encouraged to, required to. A fire marshal signs off or the building doesn't open. Tri-State does $22 million of EBITDA. 94% of its customers were customers last year and will be customers next year because the alternative to renewing is closing. The average invoice is $1,100, small enough that nobody in a facilities department ever fights about it, and Tri-State sends about 80,000 of them a year. The valuation firm priced Tri-State at 11 times. 11 times $22 million is $242 million. Then you drive 2 hours to Corrigan Stamping and stand on a mezzanine over 6 presses that hit with enough force that you feel it in your sternum. Art Bavacqua runs it, 3rd generation, and he can tell you the tonnage of every machine on the floor without looking. Corrigan does $14 million of EBITDA, made by real people making real parts. Corrigan was priced at 5.5 times. $77 million. Same kind of dollar. One is worth 4 times what the other is, and you ask Danae why on the drive back, and she says the thing you end up repeating for the rest of your life. The multiple isn't a score, she says. It's a verdict on how believable next year's dollar is. Tri-State's next $22 million is written into fire code. Corrigan's next $14 million depends on whether people buy cars and washing machines, and on one customer, Halverson Appliance, that is 31% of Corrigan's revenue. Concentration and cyclicality. Every buyer in the world discounts those two things, and the discount shows up as a multiple. A multiple is just the price of certainty. Then ladderback, which is where you get genuinely confused. Ladderback Foods moves $340 million of product a year. Refrigerated docks in Toledo at 4 in the morning, 68 trucks, a fleet manager named Odalise Prieto who knows the diesel price the way other people know the weather. It makes $9 million of EBITDA. 2.6%. You do the math out loud in the truck, and it stops being a number and becomes a feeling. For every $100 of food that goes through that building, Ladderback keeps $2.60 before capital, interest, and taxes. If diesel moves 40 cents and the contracts don't let you pass it through for 2 quarters, you can eat the entire year. Ladderback was priced at 5 times, $45 million. The business with the biggest revenue in the group is worth less than a fifth of the sprinkler company. Revenue is what you say at a party, Danae says. Margin is what you keep, and multiple is what someone else will pay for it. And then there's the part nobody puts in the deck. Of the $11 million the group spends every year on maintenance capital expenditure, Corrigan eats $7 million. Presses, dyes, tooling, the paint line. Tri-State spends about $1.4 million, mostly vans. So when the page says Corrigan earned 14 and Tri-State earned 22, that page is lying to you by a distance. Take out what each has to spend just to still exist next year, and Corrigan's 14 is really 7, and Tri-State's 22 is really 20.5. The gap isn't 1.5 to 1. It's closer to 3 to 1. That's why the multiple looks unfair, Danae says. It isn't. It's the only thing on the page that was already telling the truth. The cheapest money in the building, Merrick Casualty, is the last stop, and it's the strangest because nothing happens there. 31 people, carpet, a chief underwriter named Ivo Marchetti, who is 63 and writes on legal pads and prices commercial policies for landscapers and small contractors. Merritt takes in premium today for claims that will be paid 2, 4, 6 years from now. The money sitting in the gap between those two events is $140 million. That's called float. It is not yours, and you get to invest it anyway. Here's the whole trick. If Merritt writes policies carefully enough that the premiums roughly cover the claims it eventually pays plus the cost of running the place, then that $140 million costs you nothing. Break even on underwriting and the money is free. Merritt does better than break even, about $7 million a year on the underwriting itself, and the float on top of that throws off a little over $6 million in investment income. The valuation firm put the carrier at $75 million, barely over its book value, because insurance companies get priced against the capital they're required to hold, not against a multiple of earnings. You are paying 8.4% on debt in the other three boxes. And there is $140 million in this quiet, carpeted room that costs less than zero. That is why insurance keeps turning up inside holding companies. Not because anyone loves insurance. Add the 4 up. 242, 77, 45, 75, 439 million. Add the 30% minority stake in a Pennsylvania valve company Emmett bought in 1998 and never sold, worth about $35 million, and the leftovers he never folded into anything, a fire alarm monitoring book in Erie, 2 self-storage properties, a warehouse, Ladderback owns outright in Dayton, and you're at the 500 Tice read out of a folder. You get back to Cleveland understanding, for the first time, what you actually own. Which is exactly when Danae calls to tell you there is a problem at Corrigan. 4 boxes and a firewall. Halverson Appliance is moving a dryer program to Monterey. 18 months of notice, all of it polite. It takes about $18 million of revenue off Corrigan's floor, and because the stamping plant's costs don't shrink as fast as its orders do, it takes Corrigan's EBITDA from $14 to $9.5 million. Your first instinct is that the group just lost $4.5 million of earnings. Danae lets you sit with that a few seconds before she tells you the actual problem. Corrigan carries $42 million of its own debt. 42 divided by 9.5 is 4.4 times. The credit agreement Emmett signed says total leverage may not exceed 3.5 times, tested every quarter. The quarter ends in 51 days. You are in 51 days going to be in default on a loan you have never seen. And this is where you learn the shape of the thing you inherited. That $185 million of debt is not one loan. It never was. Tri-State carries $96 million. Corrigan carries $42 million. Ladderback carries $27 million, and the self-storage properties carry $20 million. Merit carries nothing because regulators don't let insurance carriers lever up the capital that's supposed to pay claims. 4 separate credit agreements, 4 separate sets of lenders who each looked at exactly one business and lent against exactly that business. Non-recourse, Danae says, and draws a vertical line down her graph paper. Corrigan's bank has a claim on Corrigan. Its equipment, its receivables, its stock. That's the end of the list. They cannot reach Tri-State's inspection contracts. They cannot reach Ladderback's trucks. They cannot reach the money in the holding company account, and they cannot reach you. That's ring fencing. It's why anyone builds a structure like this. Not for taxes, not to look sophisticated, so that the worst business you own cannot kill the 3 good ones. It's the only reason a bad quarter at a metal stamper is a problem instead of an extinction event. Now, the covenant. A covenant is a promise about the shape of the business made in exchange for cheaper money. Stay under 3.5 turns of leverage. Break it, and the loan doesn't vanish. It becomes callable. The lender can declare the whole $42 million due immediately. In practice, they almost never take the building. What they take is control of the conversation. You get 3 real choices, and Danae writes all 3 because Danae never gives you one. An equity cure. Most credit agreements let the owner wire cash in and count it as if it were EBITDA. To get back to 3.5 turns, you need Corrigan's tested EBITDA at $12 million, so you send $2.5 million down from the holding company. Fast, clean, and it buys exactly 1 quarter. Then the same problem arrives in 90 days wearing the same suit. A waiver and an amendment. You call Marisol Vega, the agent on the Corrigan facility for 6 years, and you get in front of it before the test date instead of after. That costs money. It always costs money. Or you let the box die. Corrigan at $9.5 million and 5.5 times is worth about $52 million against $42 million of debt. $10 million of equity. You could hand the keys to the bank, walk away from that $10 million, and delete $42 million of debt in one afternoon. Nothing in the structure would stop you. 1,200 people work there. You choose the amendment, and you find out what it actually looks like. Vega resets the covenant to 4.25 turns for 4 quarters, then 3.75, then back to 3.5. In exchange, an amendment fee of 50 basis points, which is $210,000 wired on signing. 150 basis points added to the spread. Monthly reporting instead of quarterly, and a required paydown of $6 million. $6 million against 42 leaves 36. 36 divided by 9.5 is 3.79 times. Under 4.25 with air to breathe. And the new spread costs you $540,000 a year on top of everything else, which is the part nobody mentions about renegotiating with a bank. You don't get forgiven, you get repriced. But look at what just happened to the equity, because this is the entire argument for and against debt in one picture. Corrigan's EBITDA fell 32%. Its equity value fell from $35 million to 71%. That's leverage running backwards. It runs forwards exactly as hard. Emmett bought Tri-State in 2009 at 7 times $11 million of EBITDA, $77 million, of which $52 million was borrowed and $25 million was Roark's own money. That business is worth $242 million today against $96 million of debt. $146 million of equity out of 25. He borrowed at a number smaller than what the business earned on the money and then waited. Emmett's one rule: there's one line in the group's history Emmett never crossed, and Danae says it the way you say a thing you've said 100 times. Never borrow at the holding company, because holding company debt has nowhere to go for its money. A lender at Corrigan gets repaid by a stamping plant. A lender at the holding company gets repaid only by dividends the subsidiaries choose to send up, and those dividends stop the instant any subsidiary has a bad year or its own lenders block the payment. Holdco debt is the only loan in this structure that can take everything, because it sits on top of all 4 boxes and outside all 4 firewalls. So you keep the fence intact. You wire the fee, you sign the amendment, and $6 million of this year's discretionary cash goes to a bank in Cincinnati instead of anywhere you'd have chosen. $14 million is now $8 million. Which is the week your cousin Ren decides to call. The only question you actually get asked. Ren Roark calls you on a Sunday, and she is not unreasonable. She's 41, a landscape architect in Portland. She has never set foot inside a stamping plant, and for 11 years Emmett sent her a check every February somewhere between $300,000 and $600,000, and she built a life with that check in it. Her position is simple and it's correct. She owns 18% of a company worth $335 million of equity. That's roughly $60 million of value in her name. She would like some of it to become money, and there it is, the only fork that exists in this job. The cash comes out of the machine, or it goes back into the machine. There is no third door. Danae walks you through the way out, because it's more expensive than you think. Cash moving sideways is free. When Tri-State sends $9 million up to the holding company, nobody taxes it. Because the holding company owns more than 80% of Tri-State, the two of them file as one taxpayer, and money crossing between them isn't income at all, it's the same pocket. That's the dividends received deduction doing its work, and it's the quiet reason holding companies are built the way they are. Inside the fence, cash slides wherever you point it, tax-free, forever. Cash moving down to a human being is a different sport. The moment a dollar leaves Roark Holdings and lands in your account, it's a qualified dividend. 20% federal, plus 3.8% net investment income tax. 23.8 cents of every dollar gone at the door. So run Ren's policy, distribute all $14 million of a normal year's discretionary cash flow. Your 62% is $8.7 million. After the 23.8%, you keep $6.6 million. Ren's 18% is $2.52 million before her own tax bill. $6.6 million a year. By any measure a normal person would use, an enormous amount of money. Then Ray Puentes calls you about Cardinal. Cardinal Fire Protection is 41 trucks and a fire suppression business in the 2 counties Tri-State has never broken into, and Renata Cardinal is 58 and wants to stop working. Cardinal does $5.2 million of EBITDA. Renata's number is 6.5 times, $34 million. 6.5 times, for the same kind of legally mandated inspection revenue you're already carrying at 11. You fund it with $20 million of new debt inside Tri-State at 8% and $14 million of the holding company's cash. The group's debt goes from $179 to $199 million, and all of it stays behind the Tri-State fence. Now do it out loud. Cardinal brings $5.2 million. The 2 dispatch boards merge, which means a Cardinal truck and a Tri-State truck stop driving past each other on the same road on the same Tuesday, and Cardinal's billing, licensing, and insurance move into an office already sending 80,000 invoices a year. Call it $1.1 million of route density and back office, so $6.3 million of EBITDA once it's inside. Take off $1.6 million of interest on the new debt and $500,000 advance. That's $4.2 million pre-tax, about $1 million of tax, so $3.2 million of cash a year on $14 million of your own money. 23% cash on cash in year one, against a dividend that would have handed you $6.6 million and never grown again. But that isn't even the trick, moving a business 3 feet to the left. Here's what actually happened when Renata signed. That $5.2 million was worth 6.5 times by itself, because by itself it was a 58-year-old woman, 41 trucks and no successor. Sitting inside Tri-State, its route density on a platform doing $22 million with 94% retention and a management team that isn't retiring. Platforms like that get 11 times. 5.2 million at 11 is $57 million. You paid $34 million. You created $23 million of value by moving a business across a line on an org chart. Not by inspecting one extra sprinkler. And the $1.1 million of synergy at that same 11 is another $12 million on top. That's multiple arbitrage, and it's the entire reason holding companies exist as a species. Buy small at small multiples. Own it inside something big that trades at a big one. Now put the two paths side by side for 10 years. Distribute $6.6 million into your life every year, $66 million over the decade, and at the end Roark Holdings is worth roughly what it's worth today. Redeploy $14 million a year going back into deals that look like Cardinal, compounding the equity at something near 15%, which is a little under what Emmett did for 26 years. $335 million becomes about $1.35 billion. Your 62% is roughly $840 million. $208 million or $840. $66 million of it spendable or almost none of it. And this is the part that explains every rich person you've ever been confused by. The correct answer is always to starve yourself and feed the machine. Every year the arithmetic says the same thing, and every year the arithmetic is right, and the only way to lose is to stop listening to it. You take a salary of $400,000 out of a company worth $500 million. You drive Emmett's truck. From the outside, you look like a guy doing fine. You don't distribute nothing because rent isn't wrong and because owners who get nothing eventually sell to someone who'll pay them something. You distribute $4 million out of this year's $8 million. Ren's 18% is $720,000. She thanks you. She had asked for 2.5. Renata Cardinal signs on a Thursday morning in a conference room in Youngstown, and it takes you until the drive home to understand that this was it. This was the decision. The whole quarter, one signature. 6 decisions a year. Here's your Tuesday. You do not inspect a sprinkler, run a press, load a trailer, or price a single policy. Roark Holdings has 11 people in it, total including you and Danae, and a controller named Aurelio Senna, who reconciles 4 sets of books and keeps a photograph of a boat on his desk. Your calendar for the year is 4 board meetings, 1 lender call a quarter, and a great deal of reading. That's not a joke about laziness. That's the job, and it took you until October to be able to say it. You allocate capital, you choose and pay the 4 people who run the businesses. You set the measurement those 4 are graded on, which quietly decides what they optimize. And you choose the capital structure, how much debt, in which box, on what terms. 4 levers, maybe 6 real decisions in a year, and each of those 6 is worth more than the 200,000 decisions made underneath you. Not because your judgment is better than Ray Puentes's. It isn't. Because a decision about where $14 million goes touches everything at once, and a decision about which truck takes Route 9 touches Route 9. The clearest version of this arrives in November, and it's about a person. Gene Rusk has run Ladderback Foods for 22 years. He's 61, he prints his route sheets, and he has not repriced the customer book since 2019 because he doesn't want the phone calls. That is the entire reason Ladderback runs a 2.6% margin. Danae has modeled it 3 ways and every way says the same thing. A disciplined repricing plus dropping the 11 worst accounts moves the margin from 2.6 to about 3.4. 0.8 of a point on $340 million of revenue is $2.7 million of EBITDA. At 5 times, that's $13.6 million of value. From one conversation you do not want to have with a man who came to Emmett's funeral. Replacing Gene Rusk is a larger financial event than anything you could personally accomplish in a year of 80-hour weeks. That's the shape of the job in one sentence. And it's why Emmett put 8% of the equity in the hands of the 4 operating chiefs and made them buy it with their own money. Whatever you measure, you'll get. Pay Art Bevaquois on EBITDA, and he'll buy EBITDA with capital expenditure because a new press adds earnings and the cost of the press never shows up in his bonus. Pay him on the return he earns on the capital he uses, and the press has to justify itself. You spend 3 weeks changing one formula in 4 employment agreements. Nobody outside the building will ever know you did it. Which brings you back to the number the lawyer said in March. $208 million, and here's what it actually is. Nobody has bid on it. Nobody is going to unsolicited. If you decided tomorrow that you wanted the money, you discover that the only buyers for a controlling stake in a private holding company are a handful of firms who will spend 9 months in diligence and then find $30 million of reasons the number is really lower. Ren's 18% is worse. On paper, it's about $60 million. In the real world, she owns a minority of a private company she cannot control and cannot sell without your consent, and any honest buyer marks that down 25 to 35% for exactly those two facts. Her $60 million is maybe 40. That's not a trick anyone played on her. It's what a minority stake is. There are 3 ways to turn any of it into money. Borrow against it, which is the one thing Emmett told you never to do at this level. Sell a slice to a private equity firm which converts paper into cash and converts you into someone with a partner who has opinions about November. Or sell the whole thing, take the check, pay the capital gains, and end the compounding you just spent a year buying. You choose none of them, which is also a decision, and it's the one you'll make again every year for the rest of your life. And the operating account is back at $26 million. 20 of that was excess in March, 14 of the 20 bought Cardinal, and the rest walked back up from the subsidiaries in the fourth quarter. Same number Tice read out of a folder. It was never yours. It was always the machine's. Your net worth is an opinion held by a valuation firm in Chicago. Your cash flow is a fact. One of those 2 things pays for your groceries. You're still driving that truck. A 2014, 180,000 miles on it, the passenger door that only opens from the inside. Everyone assumed Emmett kept it out of stubbornness. He kept it because every dollar he didn't spend went somewhere that paid him again, and because the only thing worth owning at the end of all this arithmetic isn't the $208 million. It's that there is nobody on earth who can make you sell.